Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
Every Sunday, my husband would leave the house. For 15 years, I never asked. But one day, he left his phone at home. Someone called. A woman's voice asked, "Are you on your way?" I wrote down the address. What I saw turned my whole life upside down. Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say that betrayal announces itself slowly, like a crack in a wall you pretend not to notice. I noticed. I just told myself I was paranoid. My name is Ellen Marsh. I was 44 years old, living in a colonial-style house in Naperville, Illinois, with a man I had married when I was 29. His name was Daniel Marsh. He sold commercial real estate, coached our son's Little League team for 3 seasons, and made the best Sunday morning pancakes you've ever tasted. We had a dog named Biscuit, a daughter in college, a son in high school, and a mortgage with 4 years left on it. From the outside, we were the kind of family that made other people feel reassured about life. From the inside, well, that's the story. For the first decade of our marriage, Sundays were ours. Coffee in bed, the papers spread across the duvet, the kids dragging in around 9 with cartoon-glazed eyes. Daniel would make breakfast. I would call my mother. We'd take Biscuit to the park. It was ordinary and warm and exactly what I had wanted when I was a girl watching my own parents fight over money on Sunday afternoons. Then, about 15 years into the marriage, things shifted. Gradually. The way seasons change, you don't feel the exact moment summer becomes fall, but one morning you reach for a jacket and understand that something is gone. Daniel started leaving on Sunday mornings. Not every week at first. Once a month, maybe. He'd say he was meeting a client, or catching up with his college friend Pete, or running errands that simply couldn't wait. I accepted these explanations the way you accept weather forecasts, with mild skepticism and no real plan to challenge them. What was I going to say? You're not allowed to leave the house? But once a month became twice. Twice became every single Sunday, without fail, by the time our daughter Hannah left for Northwestern. He was always gone by 9:30. He was always back by 2. He always brought something home. Coffee from a specific cafe downtown, or a newspaper, or once, memorably, a small succulent in a terracotta pot that he placed on the kitchen windowsill and never mentioned again. I started noticing the other things around year 12. The way he angled his phone away from me when a text arrived. The way his work stories became vague. Fewer names, fewer details, fewer punchlines. The way he began complimenting my appearance with a studied, deliberate consistency that felt less like love and more like management. Was I being paranoid? I asked my friend Carol that question over wine one Thursday evening. She said, "Ellen, paranoid women aren't usually wrong. They're just early." I laughed. I poured more wine. I went home and watched Daniel sleep and told myself, 15 years. 15 years of shared bills and shared children and a shared roof. I owed him the benefit of the doubt. So I stayed quiet. For 3 more years, I stayed quiet. And then came the Sunday that changed everything. It was February. One of those flat, gray Illinois mornings where the sky looks like old dishwater. Daniel was getting ready to leave. Jacket on, keys in hand, kiss on my cheek, the whole choreography I'd watched hundreds of times. I was still in my robe, holding a mug of coffee, standing at the kitchen counter. He walked out. The door closed. I turned toward the window and watched his car back out of the driveway. That's when I heard it. A buzz, low and insistent, from the counter near the fruit bowl. His phone. He had left it behind. I stared at it for a moment the way you stare at something dangerous. A wasp on a windowsill, a needle on the floor. I wasn't going to touch it. I was absolutely not going to touch it. I had never gone through my husband's phone in 15 years of marriage, and I was not about to start now. Then it buzzed again, and the screen lit up. The name displayed wasn't a name. It was a letter. Just one letter. R. A woman's voice when I picked up, though I hadn't planned to. My hand had moved without instruction from my brain. The voice was low, warm, unhurried. The voice of someone who had been calling this number for a very long time. Are you on your way yet? My throat closed. I said nothing. The woman on the other end paused, then said it again, slightly impatient. Daniel? Are you coming? I put the phone face down on the counter without hanging up. I stood very still. Then, because my hands were already moving without permission, I picked it back up, opened the recent calls, found the number attached to that single initial. I wrote the address from the contact information on the back of a grocery receipt with a pen that was almost out of ink. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, still in my robe, and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I didn't cry. Because some part of me, some cold, ancient, self-preserving part, had already known. And knowing, finally, after 15 years of not quite knowing, felt less like a wound and more like a diagnosis. It still hurt. God, it hurt. But at least now I had a name for the pain. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. Biscuit came and pressed his warm, heavy head against my knee, the way dogs do when they sense something has broken in the room. I put my hand on his fur and breathed. Outside, a snowplow scraped slowly down our street. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen clock, a ridiculous rooster-shaped thing Hannah had given us as a joke gift that somehow ended up permanently mounted on our wall, ticked through the silence. At some point, Daniel came back for his phone. I heard his car in the driveway and stood up fast, smoothed my robe, placed myself at the sink as though I'd been rinsing a mug. He came through the side door, slightly flushed from the cold. "Forgot my phone," he said. "It's on the counter," I said. He picked it up. He glanced at the screen, checking, I understood now, whether it showed any sign of disturbance. It didn't. I had put it back exactly as I found it. He looked at me. I looked at him. I gave him the small, neutral smile I had apparently been perfecting for years without realizing it. "Thanks," he said. He left again. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I sat back down on the floor. What followed? In the days after, while Daniel moved through our house with his usual careful cheerfulness, while I cooked dinners and attended a school event for our son Tyler and walked Biscuit and answered emails, was a private, ruthless accounting. 15 years of marriage. The house, purchased together in 2011, worth approximately $480,000 now by the last assessment. The retirement accounts, joint, carefully built. Daniel's income, the dominant one for most of our marriage, though I had worked as a medical billing specialist for 11 years and recently moved to full-time. My own savings, modest but present. The children, Hannah, 21, at Northwestern on partial scholarship. Tyler, 16, a junior at Naperville Central. Then the less quantifiable losses, my sense of reality, my trust in my own perception. 15 years of small moments I would now have to re-examine like evidence at a crime scene. The succulent on the windowsill, the phone angled away, the client meetings on Sunday mornings, the careful compliments. I was terrified. I want to be honest about that, because this story is not about a woman who was never afraid. I was afraid in a very specific, domestic way. Afraid of being alone at 44. Afraid of the legal complexity. Afraid of what it would do to Tyler. Afraid of telling Hannah and watching her face change. Afraid, too, of being wrong. What if I had misread everything? What if R was a business contact, a family member, someone completely innocent? But I knew. The voice had been too comfortable, too familiar. Are you on your way yet? Not the voice of someone calling a colleague. The voice of someone who had been waiting, reliably, on Sunday mornings, for a very long time. I did not confront Daniel. This was the first decision, and I made it deliberately. I had seen enough friends go through divorces to understand one thing. The spouse who confronts first, without evidence, loses. They cry, they beg, they accept whatever explanation is offered, and then the other party has time to cover tracks, move assets, prepare. I was not going to do that. What I was going to do required cold thinking, and cold thinking required that I continue to appear exactly as I always had: warm, slightly distracted, reliably domestic Ellen Marsh, while I figured out what I was actually dealing with. My first step was information. I called Carol on a Wednesday afternoon from my car in the parking lot of the grocery store. I told her everything in a flat, factual voice that surprised even me. When I finished, the silence on Carol's end lasted about 4 seconds. "Okay," she said. "First thing, do not touch the joint accounts. Do not move a dollar. Anything that looks like financial preparation can be used against you in court." "I know," I said. "Second thing, you need a lawyer before you need proof. Just a consultation. Someone who specializes in high-asset divorce." "We're not high-asset," I said. "Ellen, your house alone—" "Right," I said. "Right." The lawyer Carol recommended was a woman named Patricia Hollis, based in downtown Naperville. I called her office that afternoon and scheduled a consultation for the following Thursday, identifying myself simply as a woman exploring her options. I paid the consultation fee from my personal account, one I had opened 6 years ago, for what I told Daniel were household management purposes. He had never asked to see the statements. That small, separate account felt suddenly like the most important thing I had ever done. The third thing I needed was the truth about R. Not suspicion, not inference. Actual, documentable truth. I pulled the grocery receipt from my coat pocket that evening, smoothed it on the bathroom counter after Daniel had fallen asleep, and looked at the address I'd written in almost dead ink. It was a residential address, on Fieldstone Drive, about 12 minutes from our house. 12 minutes. For 15 years. I folded the receipt and tucked it inside the lining of my winter coat. Then I stood in the dark bathroom and made myself a quiet promise. I was going to find out exactly who lived on Fieldstone Drive, and I was going to do it without making a single mistake. The Thursday consultation with Patricia Hollis lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair and the calm, efficient manner of someone who had sat across from devastated people for 30 years and learned to be useful without being sentimental. Her office smelled like coffee and paper. There was a small framed print on the wall behind her desk. "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I appreciated the honesty. I laid out what I knew. She asked precise questions. She explained what Illinois law considered in divorce proceedings, the equitable distribution standard, the relevance of fault in limited circumstances, what I could and couldn't do legally in terms of gathering information. "Can I hire a private investigator?" I asked. "You can," she said. "Anything they document in a public space is admissible. Nothing that constitutes wiretapping, breaking and entering, or unauthorized access to private accounts." "What about driving past a house?" She looked at me over her glasses. "That's not illegal, Ellen." I nodded. The more important question, Patricia said, is what you want the outcome to be. Information or action? Both, I said, in that order. She gave me a referral for an investigator, a former police detective named Gary Sutter, who worked out of a small office in Lisle. I called him from my car before I'd even pulled out of the parking structure. Gary Sutter was 60, quiet-spoken, and deeply unimpressed by everything, which I found reassuring. We met the following Monday at a diner near his office. I gave him the address on Fieldstone Drive and Daniel's Sunday morning schedule. He quoted me a flat fee for 2 weeks of documented surveillance. Photographs, time-stamped, location verified. I wrote him a check from my personal account. That same week, I drove past Fieldstone Drive for the first time. I told myself I was just orienting, getting a sense of the geography. It was a quiet residential street, well-maintained, the kind of neighborhood where people hung fall wreaths even in February because they were planners. The house at the relevant address was a tan brick 2-story with a silver SUV in the driveway and window boxes that would hold flowers when it was warmer. It looked, I thought, almost exactly like our house. That detail stayed with me for days. Meanwhile, something shifted in Daniel's behavior that week. Not dramatically. Nothing Daniel did was dramatic. But there was a new attentiveness about him. He started appearing in rooms I was in more often. He asked about my day with slightly more follow-up questions than usual. Once, he came up behind me while I was at the kitchen counter and put both hands on my shoulders in a way that felt less like affection and more like assessment. I responded to all of it with the same mild warmth I always had. But I was paying attention, and I understood, on some instinctive level, that he had sensed something. Not what, just a change in atmosphere, the way animals sense pressure dropping before a storm. I was careful. I made no unusual phone calls from the house. I checked my email for Gary Sutter's updates only on my work laptop during lunch breaks. I kept the grocery receipt in my coat lining and the coat in the back of the closet. 2 weeks after Gary Sutter began his work, I received an envelope in the mail at my office address. I had asked him to send nothing to the house. I opened it in my car. There were 14 photographs. They were clear, professionally shot, time-stamped. The first showed Daniel's car parked in the driveway of the Fieldstone Drive house at 9:47 a.m. on a Sunday. The second showed Daniel at the front door of that house, not knocking, using a key. I sat with that for a long moment. A key. He had a key. The subsequent photographs showed him leaving at 1:23 p.m. And in one photograph, taken through a window from a distance, technically legal according to Gary's assessment, there was a woman, standing at a kitchen counter in what appeared to be a bathrobe, laughing at something Daniel had said. She looked like she was in her late 30s. Dark hair. Comfortable. At home. She was at home. This was her house. And my husband had a key to it. The last photograph was the one that removed any remaining possibility of misinterpretation. It showed Daniel and the woman in the driveway, next to his car, just before he left. She had her hand on his arm. He had his hand on her face. It was the gesture of people who had been doing this for a very long time and saw no reason to hide it inside their own driveway. I put the photographs back in the envelope. I sat in my car in the office parking lot in the gray February afternoon, and I understood, with absolute, documentable certainty, that my marriage had been a lie for at least as long as my daughter had been alive. I put the car in drive. I had a plan to execute. Patricia Hollis filed the divorce petition on a Tuesday morning in early March. I had spent 2 weeks preparing with her, reviewing every document, every account, every asset. I had made copies of 15 years of joint tax returns, which I had always been the one to organize and file. I had documented the house's current estimated value with 2 independent appraisals. I had prepared a clear timeline of our marriage's finances, which showed that while Daniel's income had been larger, my contribution to household management, child rearing, and our son's educational costs had been consistent and substantial. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. Illinois is not a fault-based divorce state, but Patricia had advised me to keep the documentation of Daniel's relationship available, not to weaponize it publicly, but to prevent him from arguing, as some husbands do, that the marital breakdown was the wife's doing. Daniel was served at his office on a Wednesday afternoon. I know this because Patricia texted me. Served. 2:14 p.m. I was at my desk at work when the text arrived. I set my phone face down and finished the spreadsheet I was working on. Then I went to the break room, poured a cup of coffee, and stood at the window looking at the parking lot, and felt something I hadn't expected. A deep, physical calm. Not happiness. Not relief exactly. Something more like the feeling of having told the truth after a very long silence. Daniel called 7 times between 2:30 and 4 p.m. I did not answer. He texted, "Ellen, we need to talk. Please." I did not reply. At 6:15 p.m., his car was in our driveway when I came home from work. He was in the kitchen. He looked like a man who had been hit by something he hadn't seen coming, which was, I reflected, a reasonable description of what had happened. His face was pale, eyes red at the edges. 15 years, he said. You're not even going to talk to me first? I'm talking to you now, I said. I put my purse down. I did not raise my voice. Were you going to talk to me first? Before you used a key to someone else's house for... How long, Daniel? How long exactly? His jaw tightened. Where did you get... It doesn't matter where I got it, I said. It's documented. It's in the file. He changed then, fast. The wounded husband evaporated, and something cooler replaced it. He said, very quietly, "You've been investigating me." "I've been protecting myself," I said. 3 days later, the call came not from Daniel, but from her. I didn't know her name yet, though Gary's report had identified her through public records. Rebecca Carver, 38 years old, divorced once, no children, worked as a marketing director for a logistics company. She called from a number I didn't recognize on a Saturday morning while I was grocery shopping. "I think we should meet," she said, when I answered. Her voice was the same as I remembered from that Sunday. Low, self-possessed. "I think there are things you don't understand about your situation." "I understand my situation quite well," I said, standing in the cereal aisle. "Daniel and I have been together for 11 years, she said. "I'm not going anywhere. And if you push this, if you make this ugly, you should know that Daniel has resources you don't know about. We've spoken to an attorney. You're not going to get what you think you're going to get." I put a box of oatmeal in my cart. "Thank you for the call, Rebecca," I said. "Please don't contact me again. Any further communication should go through my attorney." I hung up. 11 years. Tyler was 5 when it started. Hannah was 10. I got to my car, sat down, and let myself feel it fully. The rage, the grief, the sheer scale of the deception. For exactly 4 minutes. I set a timer, and then I called Carol. "She called me," I said. "Of course she did," said Carol. "She said they have resources I don't know about." "Of course she said that," said Carol. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm not stopping." That weekend, I took Tyler to his grandmother's, my mother's house in Evanston, and told my mother a simplified version of the truth. She held my hands across her kitchen table and said nothing for a while. Then she said, "Your father and I always thought you were the strongest of our children." I drove back to the empty house. I took a bath. I ordered Thai food. I watched an old movie I'd seen a dozen times and didn't follow a single scene. I gave myself those 2 days because what was coming would require everything I had. The following week, Daniel asked to meet for coffee. Not at the house, at a neutral place, he specified in a text. He suggested a cafe downtown that we had gone to occasionally over the years, which I suspected was a deliberate choice, meant to evoke some sense of normalcy or shared history. I agreed, because Patricia had advised me that demonstrating willingness to communicate, calmly and through proper channels, was useful optics if the case went before a judge. I arrived first. I ordered tea. I sat with my back to the wall, which I had read somewhere was what people who feel in danger instinctively do. I didn't feel in danger, but I noticed I'd chosen the position anyway. Daniel came in looking better than he had in our kitchen. He'd had a few days to compose himself. He sat down, ordered nothing, and placed his hands on the table in what I recognized as a deliberate gesture of openness. "I don't want a war," he said. "Neither do I," said. "Then let's talk about a settlement. Something fair. Something that doesn't drag through the courts for a year and cost both of us everything." "What are you offering?" I asked. What he offered was, in Patricia's later assessment, approximately 60 cents on the dollar. He proposed that I take a buyout of my share in the house, a figure that reflected the original purchase price, not the current appreciated value. He proposed that we split the retirement accounts evenly, which sounded fair until you realized that his 401k was 3 times the size of mine, because he had been contributing at a higher rate for a decade. He proposed no spousal support, citing my full-time employment. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. "I'll pass this to my attorney," I said. "Ellen." He leaned forward slightly. "Patricia Hollis is going to cost you more than you'll gain. You know that." "Maybe," I said. "We can do this ourselves. 2 adults, 15 years, we know each other. We don't need—" "Daniel," I said, and something in my voice stopped him. "You had a key to her house. You spent 11 years of our marriage with another woman, 12 minutes from where our children were growing up. You left every Sunday morning and came home and made pancakes." I paused. "I am not going to sit across a cafe table from you and negotiate my own settlement. My attorney will be in touch." I left first. I did not look back. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a moment and noticed that my hands were completely steady. That steadiness surprised me. A year ago, 6 months ago, I think I would have cried in that cafe, or agreed to something, or apologized, reflexively, for creating conflict. Not now. That week, I built the support structure I needed, deliberately and without embarrassment. Carol was already in. She had been since the grocery store parking lot call. I added my sister Janet, who lived in Indianapolis, and who, once I told her the full story, said, "Oh, finally," in a tone that made me understand she had suspected for longer than I had. I added my therapist, Dr. Susan Park, whom I began seeing weekly and who helped me understand that the eerie calm I felt was not coldness, but clarity. The specific clarity that arrives when you stop lying to yourself. I also told Hannah. That conversation I had dreaded most. I drove to Northwestern on a Saturday, took her to lunch, and told her as plainly and kindly as I could. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Does Tyler know?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm going to tell him this weekend." 11 years, Hannah said. She stared at her food. "So basically my whole life." "I'm so sorry," I said. "Mom," she looked up. "Don't be sorry. You didn't do anything." I held that sentence close for a long time afterward, the way you hold something warm. Tyler took it differently, with the specific teenage combination of fury and shutdown that I had expected. He didn't speak to Daniel for 3 weeks. He threw himself into school and track practice and a controlled, simmering anger that I recognized because I felt it too. But my children were not broken. Shaken, yes. Reoriented, yes. But not broken. That told me something important about the 15 years, the real 15 years, the parts that had been true. I had built something real, even inside a lie. My children were evidence of it, and no settlement offer, no cafe conversation, no phone call from Rebecca Carver was going to diminish that. They came on a Sunday. Of course it was a Sunday. I had come back from a morning walk with Biscuit and was changing out of my coat when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked through the front window and felt the particular cold that has nothing to do with weather. Daniel's car, and behind it, a silver SUV. The silver SUV from the driveway on Fieldstone Drive. I took 3 slow breaths. I made sure Tyler was at a friend's house. He was. Then I opened the front door before they had a chance to knock, because I wasn't going to give them the moment of superiority that comes with being the one who rings the bell. They stood side by side on my front porch. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Rebecca Carver looked precisely the opposite. Composed, pleasant-faced, dressed in the careful manner of someone who wanted to appear non-threatening. She was attractive in a specific, groomed way. She held a small paper bag from a bakery. Croissants, I could smell. Warm ones. The deliberateness of that detail, the warm croissants, the Sunday morning, the driveway of my house, was either unconscious or it was the most audacious thing I had ever witnessed. I still don't know which. "We brought something," she said. I thought, maybe this has all gotten too formal, too adversarial. I thought maybe if the 3 of us just talked. "You're at my home," I said. I kept my voice level. "Unannounced." "We should have called," Daniel said. "I know, but every time I try to reach you—" "Through attorneys," I said. "Reach me through attorneys, Daniel." "Ellen." Rebecca's voice was very reasonable. She had a good voice for this. Warm, measured, the voice of someone professionally trained to persuade. A marketing director. Of course. "I understand that you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But I want you to understand that Daniel and I have been building something real. Something that's been real for a long time. The marriage, toward the end, you must have felt it too. The distance. The—" "Stop," I said. She stopped. I looked at her for a moment. Really looked. She was doing what people do when they want something from you. She was making herself likable. The soft voice, the reasonable posture, the croissants. She had probably rehearsed this on the drive over. She had probably told herself that if she was warm enough, measured enough, reasonable enough, I would fold. That I was the kind of woman who folded. She had miscalculated. "I'm going to tell you exactly what I see," I said. "You came to my house on a Sunday, without an invitation, carrying baked goods to explain to me that my marriage wasn't real, and yours is. You want me to accept a reduced settlement, stop the proceedings, and— what? Wish you both well? Fade away?" Rebecca's pleasant expression held for another 2 seconds. Then something underneath it shifted. "What I want," she said, with a new crispness, "is for you to be realistic. You're fighting a process that's going to cost you 18 months and $40,000 in legal fees, and you're still going to end up in a smaller house with a dog and a teenager and a salary that doesn't cover the life you're used to. We're offering you a clean exit." "You're offering me less than I'm entitled to," I said. "You're entitled to half of a marriage that—" "I'm entitled," I said, "to 15 years. 15 years of tax returns, retirement contributions, property appreciation, and documented adultery that your attorneys are going to have a very difficult time explaining to a judge. I'm entitled to spousal maintenance, which my attorney will be requesting. And I'm entitled to you leaving my property right now." Daniel made one more attempt. He took a small step forward and lowered his voice, shifting into the register he had always used when he wanted to sound like the only reasonable adult in the room. "Ellen, Think about Tyler. Think about what a prolonged court case does to a 16-year-old boy. We can still do this quietly. We can still protect him from— Don't, I said. The word came out flat and final. Don't use our son as a bargaining chip on my front porch. He is not a strategy, and you do not get to invoke his name to protect yourself from consequences you chose. That landed. I watched it land. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he looked away. Silence. Rebecca looked at me for a long moment with something I can only describe as recalibration. The warmth was gone. The bakery bag hung at her side. "You're making a mistake," she said. "That's my right," I said. They left. I stood in my doorway and watched the silver SUV back out after Daniel's car, and I did not move until both vehicles had turned the corner and disappeared. Then I closed the door, slid down it slightly, just for a moment, and allowed myself to feel the fear that had been running underneath the whole conversation like a current under ice. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. The process was expensive. It was slow. It was brutal in the specific way that legal proceedings are brutal: grinding, expensive, exhausting. But she was wrong about the outcome. I had Patricia Hollis. I had 14 time-stamped photographs. I had 15 years of financial documentation. I had the original purchase agreement for the house, the joint retirement statements, the tax returns. And I had the specific, steely quality of a woman who has been quiet for 15 years and has finally decided to speak. The fear, when I examined it, didn't feel like weakness. It felt like fuel. I texted Patricia. They came to the house. I handled it. Let's accelerate the timeline. Her response came in 4 minutes. Good. I have something to show you. Call me Monday morning. What Patricia had to show me on Monday morning changed the shape of everything. She had found a second account. Not a hidden account exactly. Daniel hadn't been that clumsy. But Gary Sutter, who Patricia had asked to extend his work into Daniel's professional finances, had identified a pattern of payments flowing from Daniel's commercial real estate commissions through a business entity, a small LLC registered in Delaware, that did not appear on any of our joint tax returns. The LLC had a business address that turned out to be a mail forwarding service. Over 11 years, an estimated $340,000 had been routed through it. He was keeping a separate financial life, Patricia said. For 11 years, I said. Likely corresponding to the duration of the relationship, Patricia said. The property on Fieldstone Drive. Her name is on the deed, but our forensic accountant believes he's been contributing to the mortgage, regularly, for years. I thought about the succulent on the kitchen windowsill, the one he had brought home one Sunday, years ago, and never explained. I thought about all the Sunday mornings he had come home slightly too cheerful, slightly too careful, bringing small offerings: coffee, newspapers, a plant. Like a man performing the role of husband for an audience he'd already stopped believing in. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means we're not talking about equitable distribution of marital assets anymore," Patricia said. "It means we're filing an amended petition. It means we're going into that courtroom with evidence of financial misconduct during the marriage. A judge in this county will not look kindly at $340,000 diverted from marital income over 11 years. It changes your maintenance claim. It changes your asset claim. It changes everything." I sat with that for a moment. $387,000. Tyler's entire childhood, Hannah's adolescence, all those Sunday pancakes. The hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. Daniel arrived with his attorney, a firm from Chicago, expensive, the kind with a marble lobby and associates who carried matching leather portfolios. Rebecca was not in the courtroom. I had thought she might be, but of course she wasn't. She was smart enough to know that her presence would only confirm the narrative my attorney was presenting. I sat beside Patricia Hollis in a pencil skirt and a dark blazer, hands folded on the table, the same stillness I had been practicing for months. I had slept well the night before, which surprised me. I had expected to lie awake, turning everything over. Instead, I had fallen asleep early and dreamed about nothing I could remember. Daniel's attorney led with the argument that the marriage had been deteriorating for years due to mutual emotional withdrawal, a phrase I recognized from the offer he'd made in the cafe. The implication was that both parties had contributed to the breakdown, that the blame was shared, that this was a story about two people who had grown apart, not a story about one person who had built a second life 12 minutes from home. Patricia stood and presented the photographs first. She presented them methodically, each one time-stamped and narrated in a flat, factual voice. The car in the driveway, the key in the lock. 11 Sunday mornings documented across 3 months of surveillance. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The photographs narrated themselves. Then she presented the financial records. It was during this portion of the presentation that Daniel, for the first time in the years I had known him, lost his composure in a room where other people could see it. His attorney leaned over and whispered something urgent. Daniel whispered back. The whispered exchange became slightly less quiet, then slightly less quiet again. The judge glanced at them once, with the neutrality of someone who has seen this particular moment many times before. His attorney tried to characterize the LLC as a legitimate business vehicle, used for professional expenses, a common structure in commercial real estate, entirely standard, nothing unusual. Patricia's forensic accountant dismantled this in about 12 minutes, line by line, payment by payment, category by category. The accounts had been used for property costs, restaurant charges, travel expenses, and once, notably, for a piece of jewelry with a retail value of $4,200. "Can you tell us," Patricia asked the accountant, "whether this jewelry purchase corresponds to a date of significance?" "Yes," said the accountant. "It was purchased on February 14th, 2019. Valentine's Day. The year I had received grocery store flowers and cooked a dinner I thought was romantic. A sound came from Daniel's side of the table. Not a word, just a sound. A small exhale. The sound of a man watching something collapse that he had spent a decade carefully constructing. The judge asked Daniel's attorney several pointed questions. The attorney answered some of them precisely and requested time to respond to others. The request was noted. The judge's expression remained professionally neutral, but there is a specific quality to a neutral expression in a courtroom when one party has just watched 11 years of documented financial misconduct entered into the permanent record. It is not sympathy. It is not condemnation. It is simply the face of someone who has seen enough to understand exactly what they are looking at. After the session, in the hallway outside, Daniel caught me by the elbow. "Ellen," he said. His voice was very low, stripped of the careful management it usually carried. "Whatever you think of me, the kids don't need to go through more than they already." "I've thought about the kids every day for 6 months," I said. I removed my arm from his hand, gently but completely. "That's why I made sure everything was documented, so this doesn't drag on, so there's no ambiguity. So Tyler and Hannah don't spend the next 3 years watching us negotiate in the dark." He looked at me, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not the cold calculation I'd seen glimpses of in the cafe and in our kitchen. Something more exposed than either of those. The recognition of a person who has just understood, fully and without remaining escape routes, that the person standing in front of them is no longer the person they thought they knew. Good, I thought. That was exactly who I needed to be. The judge issued preliminary findings 3 weeks after the hearing. The findings were extensive, precisely worded, and largely favorable to my position in every material respect. The court found that the LLC had functioned, in practice, as a sustained vehicle for concealing marital income over an 11-year period. The total amount identified, including estimated contributions to the Fieldstone Drive property, personal expenditures on Rebecca Carver, travel, dining, and the Valentine's Day jewelry, came to $387,000 when the forensic accountant's complete analysis was submitted and accepted into the record. This was not, as Daniel's attorney had argued in a final, somewhat desperate attempt at mitigation, a minor bookkeeping irregularity arising from the complex administrative practices of commercial real estate. The judge used the phrase sustained financial deception in the written findings. She did not use the word fraud, which carries a specific legal threshold that requires criminal intent to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But she came very close to the edge of it. Close enough that Daniel's Chicago attorneys, I later learned, had strongly advised him against any further litigation. What I received in the final settlement: the house. Full ownership, with Daniel required to release his equity stake against a structured payment over 18 months. A payment to be made, the settlement specified, from his verified personal income, not through any business entity. The judge had ordered both of his business accounts placed under a court-appointed financial oversight officer for the duration of the settlement period. He could not move money without documentation. My full share of the joint retirement accounts, plus a proportional adjustment for the years during which his retirement contributions had been artificially suppressed by the consistent diversion of income to the LLC. This argument had been Patricia's most technically complex, and it had held completely. Spousal maintenance for 6 years, at a monthly amount calculated not from Daniel's declared recent income, which had appeared modest, as declared income tends to appear when a third of it has been flowing through a Delaware LLC for a decade, but from his documented earning capacity, established through commission records from the 3 years before the LLC structure had fully reduced his visible income. Tyler's remaining school expenses, shared equally, with a provision for college costs built on the same formula applied to Hannah's support. No ambiguity. No room for future renegotiation based on changed circumstances that Daniel might engineer. I signed the final settlement agreement on a Thursday morning in Patricia Hollis's office. The spring light came through her window at a low angle and made a warm stripe across the conference table. Patricia slid the document across the desk, and I read every page, all 31 of them, before I put pen to paper. It took 40 minutes. Patricia refilled both our coffee cups twice. She did not rush me. She had never rushed me. When I put the pen down, she said, "You did well." "We did well," I said. She gave me the small, efficient smile I had come to recognize as her version of genuine warmth. Then she opened a second folder. "One more thing," she said. She slid a single page across the desk. "This arrived yesterday." It was a letter from Rebecca Carver's attorney, addressed to Patricia's firm. Rebecca, it appeared, had learned of the financial findings in detail, perhaps through Daniel's own attorneys, perhaps through the public record, and had retained her own legal counsel. She was pursuing a civil claim against Daniel. Her attorney characterized it as arising from fraudulent misrepresentation. She argued through counsel, made major life decisions over the course of 11 years, financial, professional, personal, based on explicit assurances Daniel had made about his intention to leave the marriage and build a future with her. With the LLC findings now in the public court record, her attorney had substantial, independently corroborated documentation to work with. She was not going to disappear quietly either. I almost admired her for that. I read the letter twice, slowly. There is a very specific feeling that comes from learning that a man who deceived his wife for 11 years had, apparently, been simultaneously deceiving his mistress about the timeline and sincerity of his intentions. It is not quite satisfaction. It is not quite pity. It is something more complicated and more exhausted than either. a recognition that deception is rarely a targeted surgical behavior. It is, more often, a way of being. A man who would look his wife in the face every Sunday morning for 15 years and say, "I'm just meeting a client," is not a man who is capable of being entirely honest with anyone. "She trusted him too," I said quietly. "It appears so," said Patricia. "That doesn't make what she did acceptable," I said. "She knew he was married. She knew about our children." "No," said Patricia evenly. "It doesn't make it acceptable. But it does make it explicable," I said. And I meant that. Not as forgiveness, not as absolution, just as a fact about the world, that people who are being deceived do not always know they are being deceived, and that the deceiver is responsible for both destructions simultaneously. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bag. On the way out of Patricia's building, I stood on the sidewalk in the thin spring sunlight. It was April now, the first genuinely warm day of the year, the kind of day that makes you feel, irrationally but truly, that something new is possible. And I called my mother. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Come for dinner. Bring Tyler." I drove to Tyler's school and signed him out for the afternoon, telling the office it was a family appointment, which was not technically untrue. He got in the car and looked at my face with the particular directness teenagers develop when they have been through something real and stopped pretending otherwise. "Is it over?" he said. "It's over," I said. He nodded once, put his earbuds in. After a moment, he pulled one out and said, without looking at me, "Mom, you okay?" I thought about the kitchen floor in February, the almost dead pen, the grocery receipt, the 15 years of Sunday mornings, the terracotta paint I had already chosen, sitting in 2 cans in the garage, waiting. "Yes," I said, and I meant every word of it. The first thing I did with my own house was repaint the kitchen. The color we'd had, a cautious, inoffensive grayish that Daniel had chosen because he said it photographed well if we ever sold, had always vaguely depressed me. I painted it a deep, warm terracotta that Hannah, when she came home for spring break, stood in front of before saying, "That's you, Mom." I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I understood it. I kept Biscuit. I kept the rooster clock, though I'm still not sure why. I kept the succulent, the one from years ago, which had somehow survived through everything, and moved it to the new terracotta kitchen where it looked, against all odds, like it had always belonged there. The first year was hard in the ways I had prepared for and some ways I hadn't. Tyler's anger had phases, at Daniel, then at the situation, then at nothing in particular, which was the hardest. I found him a therapist who specialized in adolescent family disruption, and within 3 months, Tyler described him as actually not useless, which I took as high praise. By the following fall, he was talking to Daniel again, carefully, on Tyler's terms. I didn't interfere. Hannah came home every 6 weeks or so. We developed the adult friendship that mothers and daughters can only have after something has stripped away the pretense that the mother has everything under control. We cooked together. She told me about a relationship she'd kept quiet because she thought I was too preoccupied. She said, "Mom, you were surviving. That's different." My work changed in the 2nd year. The clarity I had developed, thinking precisely, refusing to be managed, turned out to be professionally useful. I was offered a team lead position and took it. The work gave me something entirely mine, not connected to being a wife or the person who held the household together. I went back to watercolors. I had painted in my 20s and put it away when life filled up with other people's needs. I painted badly, then less badly, then occasionally, well. I hung one on the terracotta kitchen wall. Biscuit watched me work with the loyal bafflement of a dog who accepts everything his human does as meaningful. I was not lonely in the way I had feared. I was sometimes alone, which is different. On Sunday mornings, those specific Sunday mornings that had once been the site of a recurring, unexamined absence, I made my own coffee and sat in the terracotta kitchen with the newspaper and biscuit at my feet, and the absence of Daniel felt increasingly like space rather than loss. As for Daniel and Rebecca, I learned most of what happened secondhand through Carol and the inescapable information channels of a town the size of Naperville. I did not seek it out. But some things found their way to me anyway. Rebecca's legal action against Daniel had complicated things significantly. She had made major life decisions based on his assurances that he would eventually leave the marriage. With the LLC findings in the public record of my divorce, her attorney had substantial documentation to work with. The case settled out of court on terms that were, by all accounts, painful for Daniel. His commercial real estate business contracted. Professional relationships built on trust do not survive 11 years of documented financial concealment becoming public record. 2 significant clients left. His income, when Tyler mentioned it neutrally one evening, was a fraction of what it had been. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a suburb I didn't know well. He was no longer with Rebecca. Rebecca had sold the house on Fieldstone Drive. Whatever future she had waited 11 years for had not materialized. I felt something when I considered this. Not triumph, not pity exactly. Something more like the recognition I had felt reading her attorney's letter. Deception does not discriminate. It damages everyone in its radius, including, in the end, the person doing the deceiving. I didn't think about Daniel much anymore. When I did, it was in the context of the children, Tyler's schedule, Hannah's university records. He was their father. That was a permanent fact I had made my peace with. What I thought about on those Sunday mornings with my coffee and my dog in my terracotta kitchen was the woman I was now. She was quieter than before, more certain of herself, less interested in being managed and more interested in being known. She had a lawyer she trusted, a therapist she saw monthly, a best friend who had talked her through a parking lot in February, a sister who called every Sunday, and children who were, against the odds of the year they'd had, fundamentally okay. She had a small watercolor on a terracotta wall. She was, I thought, carefully, without jinxing it, happy. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Silence is not loyalty. It is just silence. What would you have done? If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.